Hi guys, Christy Wimmer here. We're going to talk out of 2 Chronicles again today, starting in chapter 31, verse 2, to chapter 33, into verse 20. We're going to continue on with Hezekiah today. Yesterday we talked about Hezekiah. We talked about just what a great king he was, and that there's sort of speculation about really how great he was. But to God said that he was great, and that there was nobody like King Hezekiah. And one of the things that we find in these chapters is we find that Hezekiah, one of the giftings that Hezekiah had, is not just in the purifying of the temple, but he had this ability to bring community together. Anywhere where we find through the scriptures where there's community happening in the way that God has intended it, you see that there's health, you see that there's blessing, because community is God's idea. If you look at God's kingdom and the way that God has set everything up, it's all about family. If you take yourself outside a family in the kingdom, you really take yourself outside of the kingdom of God. So God has designed it for you to be in community. He's designed it. That's where blessing is. That's where we find out more of who we are. It's where we find out the things that we're weak in, the things that we're good at. And Hezekiah had this great gift of bringing the family together, the community together, and also in reestablishing purification to the temple. And in that's where blessing was. Is that when we're living this life where there's stuff that's out of us, we're worshiping God in the right way, and there's blessing that comes into our life, and it should cause us to be grateful, and it should cause us to worship. Even with all of that, even with doing the things that God had asked him to do, he still got attacked. There was opposition. Sometimes we can think, well, if I'm doing everything right, I'm doing what God's asked me to do, then I'm not going to have any hardship. But really the truth is that some of the greatest hardship and opposition we get is when we're doing the right thing. One of the ways that I know personally that I'm onto something, that I'm maybe doing something that God has for me to do, is that I have a lot of opposition. I have, people talking about me. I have, people saying things or doing things or just kind of doing things that I would rather not be a part of. It's just harassment. It's just opposition. And here Hezekiah is attacked. But what God did is that God raised people up to protect him and to surround him and to bring him victory. And that's what God will do for you. You're never alone. Again, God has set this up as family. God has set this up in community. And what we find in with Hezekiah is that even when opposition came, what God did is that God set people up to actually bring him into victory. And Hezekiah had a son named Manasseh. And the thing that he didn't do is that when he failed a few times, he left an open door for the worship of Baals and the Asherah poles, which are the idols. And in doing that, his son Manasseh actually came into rulership, and he rebuilt those things. He rebuilt the idols, and he gave power to him until God got his attention. And what God did is God called out to him, and Manasseh actually ignored God, and his heart was really hard towards him until God got a hold of him in a different way, and basically through torture. And it was in the torture that that Manasseh actually repented to God, and that God used him to lead the people rightly. So I think a good question to ask ourselves this morning is, one, are we in fellowship? Are we in community? Two, in that community, is God getting our attention? What does it take to get our attention? Are there things God is talking to us about or speaking to us about that maybe we're ignoring him or kind of playing like it doesn't matter? But an idol, we talk about idols being Old Testament far-fetched, but the truth is an idol is anything that we keep between us and God. Anything that you have to check with first before you say yes to God is an idol. So a good thing today is just to look at ourselves and see, is there anything that's keeping me from God, and not keeping that in our life that keeps us separate from him.